welcome to Ask UAS, where Ketchikan finds answers. Tonight we have Assistant Professor of Power Technology, Larry Olone. He studied at the Oregon Institute of Technology and the Calhoun NEBA Engineer School, and is a U.S. Coast Guard licensed marine engineer and power instructor. And he's had a lot of interesting life experiences. We're looking forward to hearing some stories.
I'll try to keep the sea stories to a minimum.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Glad you're here. So this is the official title of things here. Really, it's kind of entitled, "What do we do down at the Maritime Training Center?" People see our building down there. People might know that we kind of do maritime things, but what is it that we actually do down there? And that leads directly into the whole discussion about maritime career opportunities. Okay. And before I get too far, I do want to say that it's not just maritime that we have down there at the MTC. That's where our nursing programs are also. The CNA and the nursing programs are worked out of that building. Well, the professor's offices are right next to mine. I know nothing about those other than nursing is a really good career. So if that interests you, call and ask somebody else questions about that. I'm not the person to talk to. Okay. So we have a wide variety of maritime type careers available here in Alaska. And usually when people think maritime up here, this is the primary thing that they think about is fishing. You'd be amazed at the number of different directions that you can go into in this field. Just a little bit of history. Another path in life, I could have become a maritime historian because this stuff really, really interests me. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that mankind has been going to sea for a crazy long time. Okay. I just learned recently that Neanderthals started voyaging in the Mediterranean Sea around 100,000 years ago. Just crazy numbers. Who knew that? Okay. Um, uh, Human beings recognizable as us started voyaging about 50 to 70,000 years ago, and those were the first people that spread out of Southeast Asia and into Australia. So the Australian native people have been there pretty commonly accepted for about 50,000 years, got there by voyaging by sea back in the day. So we've been doing this stuff for a long, long time. And then as trade and stuff like that expanded, you perhaps have heard of the Phoenicians in the Mediterranean Sea. Well, around 500 BC, they were actively voyaging around the Mediterranean. They left the gates of Gibraltar. It's a little bit unknown whether they actually voyaged around Africa, but they certainly got deep down into Western Africa in that time frame there. So people have been doing this for a long, long time. Most people are a little bit familiar with North American history and the first Europeans, quote unquote, first Europeans to make it to North America. Probably about 1000 AD, could have been 800, something like that. If you go back and you look at the peopling of North America, though, you will find that there is good, solid evidence that people came up out of Eastern Asia via canoe and voyage routes around the Aleutians and down the western side of America. I'm not going to go into the whole controversy about the peopling of North America because people spend their entire lives disagreeing about that. Let's just say that it's totally possible, and there's good evidence that that occurred around 10 to 15,000 years ago. So the native peoples coming out of East Asia got here around then, as I said. Probably the first Europeans were the Vikings, roughly 800 to 1000 AD. And by those standards, Columbus was a kind of a latecomer to all of this, 1492, something like that. And the question is, did Columbus just embark out onto the sea because he thought that there was something out there, or did he have a map? And it's pretty well thought that Columbus knew that there was something out there coming from the Basque fishermen. In the late 13 and the early 1400s, the Basque fishermen were already fishing on the Grand Banks off of the Maritimes in Canada, and it's pretty well felt that that's where uh, Columbus got his basic sailing directions from. Now we told you this how big the world is. But anyway, so mankind has been doing this for a long, long time. Um, Maritime routes became the routes of trade and commerce. And if you follow anything about the ancient wrecks that have been discovered for a long time in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, this goes back thousands of years. And what do they find? They find amphorae and bronze tablets and stone and all the rest of that stuff. So maritime became the way trade was carried by the sea. Us in Alaska here have a long and storied maritime history on our own, and we've done pretty well at putting ships up on the rocks for centuries here. It's estimated and pretty well documented. We've got close to 4,000 wrecks in Alaskan waters from 1750 on. Okay, they don't know where every single one is, but they've got documentation, good documentation on about that many. Okay, and all you got to do is live here and easily see why this is going on. Just some interesting ones. Princess Bay, up near Lynn Canal and Juneau, went up on the rocks in the early 1900s. The Oduna was a World War II Liberty ship, and it had been converted to other purposes, and the radars were inoperative, and who knows whether the mate fell asleep on the bridge or not, but they put that one up on the rocks out near Dutch Harbor. Here's a very recent one out in Kodiak. And like I say, the boats up here don't seem to have any problem finding the rocks. They do it with amazing regularity. And then on the one on the right, you may or may not be familiar with this one. This is the Scandies Rose. It just went down a couple of years ago. And a loss of, I think there were 7 crew members on board and the loss of 5 lives in that. Picture down on the lower right, they've actually got a picture of it laying down on the bottom there. And it's interesting. So these other ones, the boats went up on the rocks. What happened to the Scandies Rose? Okay, outdated stability information. There had been, they were, I don't have every single detail. You can read the National Transportation Safety Board accident report. It's got it all. But they had modified the vessel and they were taking heavier pots than they were, their stability tables were made out for. And the boat had been modified somewhat. That hadn't been properly modeled. They didn't have up-to-date stability calculations. And then they went out to sea and the vessel immediately began to icing conditions. And boom, it was gone. So it's a rugged environment. You got to be totally up with what this stuff is out there. Okay, all the time. Okay, it can be very unforgiving. It can be beautiful. It can be wonderful out there. It can be very, very unforgiving environment. And as this wag suggested, that the sea impartially hand out our awards. Okay, even well-founded boats can get in trouble. This is a routine crossing of the Columbia Bar, one of the most treacherous bars in the world. And so you can see nothing particularly untoward about that crossing. I've been across there many times myself. I was on a oil tanker, oil tank, old as Noah's Ark. And those old tankers took a lot of water across the deck. They have a catwalk. They had a 4.5 house on there. And they had a catwalk to run between the two of them. And when you're getting ready to go across the bar, the bridge, the captain would put out the word, you stay in the house that you're in now, you stay there. And you could look out and man, you'd see water coming all the way across that thing up over the catwalk. So it can be a little bit thrilling out there at times. Okay. So what's the thing that you've got to have to survive in all of these situations? It's training. Okay. And that's what we do down at the Maritime Center. Primarily is we train mariners of all sorts. So this is down there, 600 Stedman Street. Um, we've been the recipient, fortunate recipient of some money in over the last 10 years. Building has been tremendously enhanced and upgraded. Please come down and visit us down there sometime. I'm not really going to take you on a tour through the building in this presentation, but if you're ever interested, give a call. We'd be happy to show you around down there. Okay, so that's our building right there. Can anybody tell me what this thingy right up front is? Again?
Dory.
You're in the right end of the spectrum. It is a lifeboat. And specifically, it is a lifeboat that is stowed in what's called a gravity davit. Okay? And one of the things that a seaman has to know how to do is launch a lifeboat from a gravity davit. Now, more modern lifeboats look a little bit different than this. If you take a look at the cruise ships out here, you'll see that they're all covered lifeboats. That's the standard of the day nowadays. We don't have to get a fancy lifeboat because the launching mechanism still is the same. You can launch a boat without any electric power whatsoever. Pretty tough to get it back up, but you can launch it without electricity. That's what it is. It's you got to have training to do this. These are big, heavy, kind of clunky sort of parts, and without doing it properly, people get hurt. So that's one of the basic requirements of your basic training is how to launch lifeboats. Just a little bit about maritime education in the state of Alaska. UAS belongs to the Alaska Maritime Education Consortium. Won't go off in great depth on that. But a couple of years ago, federal legislation was passed specifically to train, to direct training programs and money at mariner training institutions. And very interestingly, it was specifically aimed not for the academies. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about the academies as I go along here, but it was aimed for people like us, small colleges, technical schools, community campuses, and things like that. And because all of us in Alaska are, all things considered, pretty small. Okay, so all of these institutions got together and formed the CMAC, and with the intent of lobbying for money. The federal legislation was welcome. It was really good to see people at the highest levels of government understanding that we've got problems out there. Talk about that more in a minute. But they didn't appropriate any money. Okay, so the first leg of this whole thing is get the consortium together and then go out and look for money, post programs, which we have the first one of those on our side is up. So these are the people that are involved. Us down in Ketchikan, Prince William Sound, a college up there in Valdez. AvTech is in Seward. And then you've got UAA Ketchikan Bay and UAF Bristol Bay and UAA Kodiak. So the UAS, the UAA ones, those are parts of the University of Alaska system. AvTech is the state's vocational technical training center in Seward, and they do a real good job there. So we're all working on trying to get some stuff together. And what really brought this about, what put that federal legislation around, was a recognized shortage of mariners. It's a lot more than you would think. There's a worldwide shortage of mariners across all countries, all bounds, and particularly here in the United States for a number of different reasons. We'll talk about that as we go along here. So we've got a voice to talk together in unison when we talk and present our needs and desires to the federal government. Just a little bit on the scale of the maritime industry here in Alaska. This is interesting. Maritime sector is the largest private employment sector in the state. Okay, most people don't get that one at all. Okay, it's not as, I hate to say not as valuable, but the oil and gas industry, there's a whole lot more money involved in that. But sheer number of people being employed, it's here in the maritime sectors, and that includes lots of different things. The people that in the commercial fishing fleets, people in the processing facilities and the like, repair facilities, research. That's like UF fisheries and things like that. You may have heard about growing kelp in Alaska in recent years. Okay, it's that kind of stuff that goes on. And then the marine transportation, about 10,000 jobs in that. And that's a little bit more directly what we're focused at, getting people into the transportation end of things. Note that employees who employers say we can't get anybody, and there's a number of different reasons why they're having trouble getting people anymore. And the biggest number one reason is people like me. I was born exactly in the middle of the baby boomer generation, and we are all going away. Okay. We had this huge, throughout my entire working career, there was this big gaggle of people moving through, and there was always people around um, for employers to hire. We're going away, and we're taking our skills with us. And so the echoing generations are physically much smaller than mine was, and a general lack of emphasis on technical training and technical education skills is a big part of the problem. Don't get me going on my soapbox about that one. I will just say that this is an era of unprecedented opportunity for young people that go out and acquire technical skills. Okay. Every time I talk to colleagues and the like, I say, what does it look like for your students? And they say the phone is ringing off the hook. Okay. And that is, again, my end of the spectrum tends to be diesel engines and hydraulics and stuff like that. It doesn't matter what you go into. You can go into metrology. Anybody know what metrology is? The science of measuring things. Okay. There's a lack of people that know how to do that kind of stuff. Very important if you're making precision parts. Anyways, so we don't have the people to fill these jobs. Employers are quite frankly often running shorthanded. One of the things that employers really want to see is the catchword is multi-skilled workers. Okay, people that can do many kind of similar things for their employer. Okay, instead of saying I can only do this, well, you can do this, and then you can unplug toilets, and you can go down, change filters on the engine, and you can do all those things. Multi-skilled occupations is really what we're looking at. So training people up with these a variety of skills. We don't just teach one single thing. We teach across a spectrum of skills. So one of the things I'll tell you flat out, I'm a retired Marine engineer. I actually went to sea for a living, and I loved it. Okay, it was exactly what I was cut out to do in the world. Not for everybody. Okay, and one of the great things about actually going to sea for a living is that it normally doesn't confine you to living exactly in one place. You have a whole lot more latitude about where you live versus where you work. Okay. And one of the most interesting and common signs that employers are earning for people is when they start paying people's transportation to and from their home at the beginning and end of their rotation. When things are tightening up in industry, they start taking those benefits away, and so not so good. Now is a really good time. Okay, so lots of not everybody's like that. Not everybody's a perfect employer. Not everybody's a terrible employer. Okay, so lots of ups and downs in the world. Be that as it may, if you're in the maritime workforce, you can work in many different places. I myself sailed. I actually sailed. I worked offshore, so you can sail and you bring your money back. One of the things, one of the problems here in Alaska for a long time has been young people, they grow up, they get some education, and they don't come back. And that's the, if you want to grow good, stable communities and you want to grow a future, you got to get your young people back. Besides attracting new people in, you want to get your young people back because they are the root, the backbone of the community. So you bring your money back into town. Uh, Not to dig too hard at the Seattle fishing fleet, but all those folks work down. The boats are built down there. They drive up here. They fish up here. Their wages are paid to those people. All take that money back down south with them. Okay, so kind of nice to try and keep it here at home. Just a little bit. About the worldwide shipping industry. I said you can sail around the world and you can take a look. These are actually voyage indicator tracks. I forget exactly what the date on this is. It's not that long ago, and it shows you the major trading routes in the world, and they are pretty much what you would expect. Okay, starting in Western Europe, obviously the biggest routes there are from Western Europe to the United States, through the Straits of Gibraltar to the east coast of the United States. You got Europe down to South America, and then you've got the huge one. And although it's not spread out as far, the East Asia, around past Singapore, the Straits of Malacca, around India, and up through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal is the most valuable trade route in the world, bar none. Okay, and so it goes there. And then over West Coast, we've got the Panama Canal. Anybody heard anything about what's going on with the Panama Canal these days? What is it, Kathy?
Lack of rainfall in the area means that there's not enough water in the canal to float these giant ships.
They're running out of water.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, 10 or so, they built huge new locks there at the Panama Canal, and all the water used to fill the locks comes from impounded reservoirs. And so now we're in an era of protracted drought and ever larger shifts. So that means you use more water every single cycle. And these things have a huge effect on trade routes. When the first of these ultra large container ships came in, they started scooting. Uh, um, they would start moving through the Panama Canal to Houston. Houston saw a big boom in container ships shipping right at that exact point in time. Now they have to unload the ship. They can't load the ships as heavy, so you're not seeing as much traffic to Houston. Houston's still a huge port. Okay, so these are things. All and what this really shows is just how interconnected the world really is. Okay, there is no area that is completely isolated, and we are all, quite frankly, heavily dependent on the shipping industry. Here's one I always I ask my students when they come in. I says, "What do you think it is that allowed the globalization of the world economy?" And they always say something, well, like satellites or the internet or radio or something like that. What is it really? That thingy right there, the container ship. It's the container ship that allowed the globalization of the world's economy. Um, and I won't go into the history of that stuff. It's pretty interesting. But being able to stuff stuff in a box, dispatch it from China, arriving in the west coast of the United States 14, 17 days later. So now you've got the workers of the United States competing against the people in East Asia. And I tell my folks all the time, I says, uh, be real people, there's smart, hard working people all around the world, and a lot of them are willing to work for a lot less than you think. your work. Okay, so that's what we are competing against. That being said, about 90% of everything that you put your hands on traveled in a ship at some point in time. And that number absolutely goes for Alaska too. Um, the big ports for us are obviously Tacoma, Seattle, and Tacoma, hauling a huge amount of freight up. And the big dog in that business is Tote and Horizon Lines, both of them primarily going up to Anchorage and Kodiak. As far as I know, we don't receive any containers here on container ships here in southeastern Alaska. It is a different trade. Mentioned about the worldwide shortage of mariners that has hit home close to home. You are seeing delayed sailings. The Marine Highway is a good example of that. Um, they've had a lot of different problems, many of them not of their own making. And one of these ones is mariners. Okay. The last couple of years have been tumultuous in many different industries. The Marine Highway has lost a lot of people and often have had to delay or not bring vessels into service because of the lack of crew. It's been a hot topic for the last year or two, and it's not just us up here. It's every Washington State Ferries has had the same problems. People that you wouldn't even think about. Scripps Oceanographic with their research vessels shanghaied one of my people last year. He was glad to get the work, but they were desperate. They needed somebody, so mariners are in demand. Here's one that most of us don't even think about. It said we don't get container ships here in Southeast Alaska. How does our freight get here? Barges. Everything comes on barges. That's what we're used to seeing in Southeast Alaska. And what people don't recognize is the extensiveness of those trade routes out the chain, and particularly in Western Alaska. Incredibly important out there. Food, fuel, transport of all sorts goes on barges, and it doesn't just hit these ports. Goes up the rivers also. Fuel deliveries to villages up on the rivers and the like is a very important part of the economy of that part of the states. Just want to, I won't going to go to this in great depth, but we had the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, showed up in the state just a couple of weeks ago and announced the labeling of many of these barge routes in Alaska as federal highways. Okay. And that has, again, it doesn't come with any money right off the bat, but in the long term, that opens funding revenue streams, can open revenue streams to keep these things open. So it's an important step. I mean, how long is that? How long have these routes been open? 2 ships like this, okay, well over 100 years, 120, 130 years, and finally getting around to recognize how important this is to us. Okay, so transportation routes, and we are subjected to have other parts of the country get different kinds of tough weather. Well, we get cold and ice up here. Okay, this is just a couple of years ago when they missed due to weather. They missed the last fuel shipment into Nome, and then the ocean started freezing up. They figured that they'd run out of fuel by the end. Still winter to them, but the end of the spring. And so they're going, what are we going to do? And I don't know if you've had any experience with the business, but flying fuel in on C-130s is incredibly expensive. Incredibly. Okay, so what did they do? Well, they got a tanker and they called out the Coast Guard to break ice for them, like 300 miles. They went through like 300 miles. Okay, and where did they get that ice strengthened tanker from? They had to charter it from the Russians. You've got like 2 or 3 ice strengthened tankers in the United States. Okay, Russians have got a whole lot more. We're going to touch on more on this in just a minute here. Okay, so the Coast Guard, kudos to the Coast Guard. This is a lightweight icebreaker. The United States is down to one operational heavy icebreaker. Okay, and things are changing in the Arctic, which I'll touch more on in just a minute, radically. Okay, so keeping these shipping routes open when necessary is a big deal, particularly if you're um, living in Nome and you're dipping your tank and you're down to that far. Okay. So Congress, a couple years ago, got around to authorizing money. I think they authorized the money to with the intent of building out 6 or 7 heavy icebreakers. Is very welcome news. Um, brought down, being built down in the Gulf of Mexico. I did a similar presentation down in Houston a few years ago, and there were a number of people from the Gulf colleges there, and they all knew this is a big contract. This is a big deal. Like I said, we're down to one heavy icebreaker. They built 2 of them back in the late 70s. One has been mothballed, and they're stealing parts off that. So we're down to one heavy-duty icebreaker. And why do I harp on this? It's this thingy right here, okay? This is the Arctic, and it shows the ice cap in the Arctic. People have been trying to voyage through the Northwest Passage since around the 1600s. And if you ever wanted to read a fascinating story, Pierre Burton's The Arctic Grail details the history of Arctic exploration. It's actually kind of gruesome. That being said, we are in an era of climate change. Arctic and the Antarctic are being affected more than any other areas on Earth. And what is that doing? The amount of sea ice is diminishing radically, literally as we speak. What's that opening up? That's opening up sea routes from the North Atlantic, over down there on the bottom of the map, up through. Oh, look at this. There's the Bering Sea right there where Russia and Alaska come real close together across there. This is happening as we speak. And what are the effects of this? Well, one of the early things was tourism. Tourism is a big part of the maritime industry, okay? And this boat here was a purpose-built boat, and the upper left is early in its career, it was visiting Greenland, and then a couple of years later, it was down in Antarctica, and they pulled the boat, driving too fast in heavy ice, and they're fortunate, no loss of life, but it really points to the lack of ability to service major catastrophes in the Arctic. It goes across the board. Okay, loss of ship, loss of life. What about other things? Okay, so you go, well, there's just a bunch of rich tourists. You know, we can do without a few. We can do with a few less of them. However, these are opening up trade routes right off the bat as we speak. The oil tankers from Russia, you may have heard that there's a little dust up in Eastern Europe, been going on there for a year or two now. And Russians have been having some trouble transporting their oil out to friendly customers. And boom, this is what they're doing now. For the first time, they are, I hate to use the word routinely because they're still not routine, but they are sending tankers through the Russian polar route out past Siberia, and then lo and behold, right down past us here in Alaska. Okay, I have to admit, as far from an engineering standpoint, this stuff is fascinating. However, nothing is without risk, and our ability to respond to, in this case, a major oil spill is essentially zero. It really is, and it's going to happen. I was talking to my dad a number of years ago about ships and hazards to navigation. He says, I just don't understand. And I said, Dad, as long as there are ships on the sea, they'll go up on the rocks. And as long as there's airplanes in the sky, they'll fall out of the sky. This is just what happened. Okay. And so they're moving, starting to move this oil down through the Bering Straits, past the Diomedes. This picture on the right, this has just happened within the last year or two. the international treaties that govern this kind of thing have actually codified the routes through the Bering Sea for shipping. So it's not just a free for all anymore. You got this is your shipping lane. You're going here. This is the shipping lane that you're gonna. But you still got to get through that little pinch point there at the Diomedes. I mentioned oil just a minute ago. The ones we were talking about there were tankers. People don't think about this a whole lot, but we have essentially zero resources to handle oil spills out in places like this. This is a kind of dated here, but it shows the oil spills that happened just out in the Aleutian chain about 20 years ago over a course of time. Okay, so sooner or later, one of those tankers is going to end up on the rocks, and we're going to have a disaster, and you can just count on it. And who's primarily tasked with these responsibilities for response? It's the U.S. Coast Guard. Okay. Outstanding organization. If any young people come to me and say, "Hey, Larry, what do you think?" I said, "Think about the military." And one of the things that you can think about is the Coast Guard. They serve an incredibly vital role up here in Alaska. Okay, so us, where do we fit into the picture? Well, interestingly, Ketchikan Community College, established in the 50s, started teaching maritime courses early on. Okay. And the history is a little sketchy in there, but be that as it may, they started teaching maritime courses early in the 1950s, and we have a instructor who actually took maritime training at K-High back in the 60s. Okay, so we got a long history of providing this kind of stuff to the community. So started in the 50s. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds in this stuff, but this is important. A term that you will hear in the business is STCW requirements, which means standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping, which are the international rules about this kind of stuff. Okay. We all know that the Coast Guard is the big dog as far as maritime stuff goes, but the Coast Guard implements these international rules. Okay, they can make exceptions where they want to. What started happening was a stiffening of the requirements on mariner training. Okay, starting back in the 80s and the 90s, the world shipping industry started losing so many ships that people got concerned about it. And mind you, they weren't concerned about the loss of mariners' lives. Okay, what the banks and the insurance companies were concerned about was the paying out for those ships. Okay, so that brought about implementation of these international standards. And the truth is, it's greatly upped the qualifications of the nations that provide mariners to the world. Okay, traditionally, if you went back to the post-World War II era, there were the nations of Western Europe, Great Britain, Norway, Denmark. They were the big ones. There was us, always had highly qualified mariners. And then there was kind of the rest of the world. Well, mariners are a good source of what? Sending money home. And so many governments started encouraging the sending of their people to sea, particularly the Philippines, Indonesia, and India. Okay. And I got to tell you, they got with it about this STCW. They are training and graduating crackerjack mariners nowadays. Okay. So when these things first came into effect, when I got my first license, all you had to do was take the test, the Coast Guard issued you, it to you, and they say, see you in 5 years when you renew. Now you've got this unbelievable number of extra trainings that you have to have in order to get your credentials. So in 2013, we started a QMED oiler class here. You mentioned this just a minute ago. Who can tell me what a QMED is? Qualified member of the engine department. It's the first credentialed position in the engine room on an inspected vessel. Okay, so don't mind bragging a little bit. I'm the one that did it. Okay. And so we've been doing this for 10 years now. And quite frankly, our people are being successful. It's very, very gratifying. So it's an integral part of this. And we brought it together, that whole thing, that thing about multi-skilled workers. So we entitled the whole thing Maritime and Multi-Skilled Worker, because all of the basic skills taught in there are the basis of all of your industrial skills. Diesel engines, electricity, hydraulics, refrigeration, and all of those kind of things. So, and at the time, I don't know if any of you know him, Doug Ward was at the shipyard. He was there for a long, long time. He's since retired. And we talked to those kind of folks. So, what do you want to see? We want to see multi-skilled workers. Okay. And so we brought this thing, put it together under that umbrella. And we've had a number of people go to work at the shipyard also. Okay. So the training that we do down there, broken down broadly into 3 areas. One called generically marine transportation, and that's the techie kind of things. Okay. A multi-skilled worker, that's the engine room side of things. And then we have marine industrial and fabrication is basically our welding programs. So just the kind of thing where in maritime, where people work, obviously, as we know, fishing is huge here in Alaska. Okay, towing industry, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, towing is very, very important here in Alaska. Things that people may not think about. Okay, up in Valdez, they have tanker escorts. Okay, so they shepherd the tankers in and out of Valdez. Those are actually pretty good jobs. Okay, workboats, tugs, things people may not think about so much. Dredges. Dredging is extremely important in the United States, and it's becoming more important here in Alaska. Corps of Engineers has got a dredge that regularly works up in Cook Inlet, and up there where there's long been a offshore oil and gas industry. You have these boats down here, like on the lower right. We in the business call them mud boats, but they're oil field supply vessels. Okay, so they bring fuel and drilling mud and all the rest of that stuff out to the rigs. Just mentioned dredging. Here's where we're going to see a big project up here in Nome. Talk about the opening of the Arctic, the lack of response facilities available to us. Well, Nome is the place where they're going to go in. Okay, it's been designated. I'm not sure whether any big money has been designated yet, but this is where it's going to happen. And so you can see on the left there, that's the Port of Nome itself, and you can't fit a very big boat in there, truth be said. I was up there one time on a 300-foot ship, and we couldn't go in. It's too big. Okay? So it's been a bottleneck for a long time there. And so what are they going to do? They're going to put a big fancy new fort in up there that's going to be dredged and it's going to be constructed. And you got to be honest, what's one of the primary reasons for doing it? So you can bring cruise ships in there. Think what you want about the cruise industry. It's important to certain sectors of our economy. And so it's going to be a huge project. Again, dredging, ongoing dredging is going to be important up there. Shout out to a couple of our local employers here in Ketchikan, and again, not one that we tend to think of right off the bat, but adventure and ecotourism. It's a big deal. People pay a lot of money to come up and get on a nice boat and go out with the sea kayaks and go down to Misty Fjords, wherever they go to. They pay a lot of good money for that. And then we have our daily excursion boats. There are a lot of people that come into the maritime business by starting out working on these. Okay, we've trained numerous people from Allen Marine, one of our local providers, and shout out to Lighthouse Excursions and Jeff Carlson and his wife for the business that they got going there. Trained here at UAS, doing well for themselves. Thing that I'd like to point out is that you can sell that photograph of those seals 10, 1,000 times. Okay, a lot to be said for that. Clear cut Deer Mountain. Maybe people aren't so happy about that anymore. Okay. So, lots of different things. And again, I believe me, I do not mean to be dismissive about that small boat end of the industry. That's how a pretty fair number of people have gotten into this business. And good on them. You know, take care and advantage of opportunity where it presents us. So one of the things that we do, one of our really popular programs is welding. Down there, everybody likes to weld. Okay. And so we can issue occupational endorsements, various certifications. Our welding professor, Dan Kistner, is working on his CWI, Certified Welding Inspector, and that's a big deal. Okay, getting a CWI is a major professional accomplishment. He's close in on getting that, and that will set up opportunities for us to work with UAS Sitka and the like, and have the only welding inspectors that do open to the public in southeastern Alaska, and that's going to be a big deal eventually. Okay, so our people go to work. All anybody that uses welders has locally has often used some of our people. Okay, so we've got a really nice welding lab down there. They spent a lot of money down there a few years ago. It's got really good ventilation. We've got outstanding staff down there, people with really impressive professional qualifications. And so, I've got a good background in welding myself. I won't tell you my sea stories, but if you're in the maritime business, on the engineering side of things, you need to know how to weld. That's all there is to it. So, like I say, some of our people have gone to work for Bigger, one of the major employers in town. I think Bigger is the second largest employer in town, and good wages down there. Lots of different kinds of work that you're going to do. Sometimes build brand new vessels. Don't do those every year, but they built this one just a couple of years down there. Beautiful vessel. This is the shipyard that used to be known as a steward ship, and it changed hands relatively recently. And this is the common work that you're going to see in a shipyard, whether it's down here at Bigger or up at a place like that. Like we said, ships and barges seem to like to find rocks in coastal Alaska here, and they put big holes in them. And it takes a shipwright in order to be able to put these things together. This is skilled fabrication. They have to meet actually rather demanding codes to do like that. It's good work. If you like this kind of stuff, it's good work. And things people don't tend to think about. We've got a metal art program here. Okay, Angie down in the lower right there kind of runs that, and people love it. That class fills up every single time. People absolutely love it, and then they make all kinds of cool stuff, and so they do go do that. So come down and do metal art with us. Okay, so off into the kind of water-oriented side of things. What are the potential career paths? Well, like I said, either deck or engine, and then there's the divide between licensed and unlicensed people. Okay. So, starting off on deck operations, things that we teach, ordinary AD, we teach up to 200-ton master classes. And then down here in the engine room side of things, we've got the QMED boiler program. Don't want to get off into the weeds about this, but these are Coast Guard approved classes. And this is a very big deal. Okay. Just for instance, the QMED program, because it's a Coast Guard approved, they get, it's a 12-week class, they get 60 days of seat time. To actually get their credential, they need 180 days. Okay? So the Coast Guard grants them 60 days for having taken the class. And then when you get that next 120, you take your course completion certificate down to the Coast Guard, and they issue you, after you pay for it, they issue you your QMED credential. You don't have to take any more tests. And that's a big deal at that level. It really, really is. Okay. Coast Guard approval is fundamental to what we do. Okay. I just want to kind of mention, you don't have to look around and find pictures of the guys in the business. Okay. Well, nowadays you don't have to look far at all to find the pictures of the women in the business also. When I started doing this stuff, for all intents and purposes, there weren't any women in the commercial industry out there. And it has changed hugely over the last several decades. And we're seeing women both on the deck side and on the engineering side of things. Um, so it's good to see. Um, so deck operations, what does the mate do? Obviously, steering and navigation. They're in charge of our cargo operations, and in general, shipboard maintenance, particularly above deck maintenance. They do all that kind of stuff. So up out there on the right, we've got a dredge, and down here on the left, we've got one of our local people, a K-High graduate, Elizabeth Jogish, who is a permanent working on a dredge down in the Gulf of Mexico. So good for her. Just want to highlight a couple of extraordinarily accomplished women in this business. The lady on the left was in the first class at Kings Point. Kings Point is one of the academies, and she was in the first um, class that admitted women. I think that might have been like 1975. So before that, there were no women in any of these academies. And that's kind of the world that I entered into, was the legacy of that. And I was talking to one of my colleagues who has since moved on about the lack of women in the business. And I said, what I was really exclaiming about was the number of women in the commercial fishing end of the business. And we see that all the time up here. And that's kind of what goes on here. She said, because the door was closed for generations, the door was closed to women in the commercial part of the business. So when they opened it up, here we go. We get these very accomplished women. This lady on the left graduated. She got her master's ticket within about 10 years, became a San Francisco bar pilot, and just retired just a couple of years ago. That's an amazing accomplishment. It really is. Lady on the right is a CMA graduate, California Maritime Academy, another one of the academies. And she was the first American woman to captain one of these big cruise ships out there. Okay. Anyway, no, that's quite an accomplishment. It really is genuinely to be proud of. So deck side operations, again, navigation and cargo operations and things like that. Now we're kind of off in my end of the world here. Engineering operations, just a point of personal pride. That ship there was the Diamond State, and I quite literally sailed around the world on that vessel, which is a very difficult thing to do in this day and age. Mind you, this was at the end of the Gulf War. Okay, so what does an engineer do? I like to say that I don't know of any occupation that covers more bases than that of being a marine engineer. If you like to do lots and lots of different things, marine engineering is a great trade. Okay, so obviously keeping the propulsion machine running, machinery running. A ship is basically nothing but tanks and holds interconnected by piping systems. So you got to keep all that stuff going. We are the ones that make the electricity, we make the water, and we, in the end, unplug the toilets. Okay, so I was dealing with a shoreside person a number of years ago, and he says, "What does a marine engineer do?" And I says, "Keeps the lights on and the propeller going round and round." And very short, that is what we do. Okay, so lots of opportunity. Again, we're seeing women coming into that now, which is a good thing. I will admit I'm underrepresented in the field, but people are getting into it. On the right there, you see kind of the operating environment in an air-conditioned ship. Not what I grew up with, but consoles, things like that. And then you can get into the really, really cool stuff. This is the end of the industry that I tended to work in. Okay, these large, low-speed diesel engines, largest engines in the world. They're just cool. I mean, that's all it is. That they're cool. Okay, so we don't build these in the United States. They're all built in China, Korea. Very, very few in Japan anymore. But they are amazing, amazing machines. Here is one of our local fellas. I wish I could say I can't. I wish I could say that I influenced Carson to go to CMA, but we run a diesel engine class for high school students, and he did come into his mind was already set up. He knew where he was going to do. So he graduated from K-High a couple years ago, and is down at CMA and literally starting his second year there as we speak. He was natural. He's one of those people you could pick him out quick. Women engineers, they're there. They're coming out. You can't be afraid to get dirty. That's all there is to it. Okay, you're going to get dirty, and you got to kind of thrive in the environment. You hear stories all the time about a person that didn't know what they were getting into. They went down in the engine room the first time they took one trip, and it can be a tough environment down there. Got to be honest. It can be a tough environment, but the rewards are very, very, very good. This is actually a Matson vessel, one of the last of the steamships, which is really pretty cool in its own right. Very briefly mention them as we go along. So we've got a third assistant engineer and a Kings Point cadet. This young lady, this is amazing. Okay, she graduated from another one of the academies from the State University of New York, Fort Schuyler. Engineering graduate from there. Worked on that, worked her way up and got her first assistant's license. And that is first assistant is that's the one that you're shooting for. That is the really good job. Okay. You perform a lot of the work in the engine room yourself. You direct the work and maintain the engine room. Okay. It's just the first assistant is opportunity to learn and work on stuff like being shown here. Just a brief mention. I touch on this stuff in my classes, not only because I have to, but this end of the university, universe, we talk about boilers. We talk about boilers. We talk a little bit about steam propulsion. There are virtually no steam ships left anymore. So why do I continue to talk about this? Because any ship of any size has a boiler in it. Okay, won't go into the systems. Have to talk about that if you want to later. But you got to have a boiler. You have to know how to maintain the boiler. So that's not stuff that's just commonly taught. You got to go somewhere and get take classes in it. Just as a brief aside, so that's a steam turbine. Like I said, there's virtually no steam turbine ships left or built anymore. But fascinating part of history in and of its own. Given the choice between a steam plant and a diesel plant, the steamboat engineers are going to say they want to be on a steamboat, and the diesel guys are going to say they want to be on a diesel boat. So you learn them both and bring your way up. And like I said, hotel services, yep, you're going to learn about plumbing. And we all know what that instrument on the left there is. And by God, you're going to learn how to operate that. You're going to learn what your favorite style of snake is to get things cleaned out. And you're going to learn about marine sanitation devices, which are incredibly important and highly regulated in the world these days. So I've got some cadets there that are learning the intricacies of plumbing. Very handy homeowner skills, by the way. Okay, so on the deck side, I should say, how do you get into the business? Okay, and there's a couple different ways. Number one, go to one of the academies. There's 6 or 7 maritime academies in the United States: Kings Point, Maine Maritime, Mass Maritime, Fort Schuyler, Texas A&M, CMA, Great Lakes. I think that's okay. And I say to anybody, look, if you're young, okay, and you're looking at, you want to do some of this kind of stuff. And the most important thing is, can you afford and can you make it through a 4-year college? These are 4 real colleges, okay? Getting through one of those starts you higher on the totem pole than starting at the very bottom, okay? Because you graduate with either a third assistance or a third mate's license, and that's just a better place to start. That being said, you got to be able to get through college, and you got to be able to afford to be able to do it. So what's the other way of getting there? What we traditionally call coming up the hawse pike. What's the hawse pike? Then you asked, okay? Hawse pipe is that thing right there on the left, okay? Where the anchor chain goes down through the hull of the ship, that is the hawse pipe. So that's the traditional term used for people working their way up, starting at the bottom and working their way up. And that's one of the great things about this industry is that you can start at the bottom. Academic credentials are good. They will assist you in other parts of your life. However, in this business, the most important thing is the credential that you hold and the amount of sea time that you have. All of those are attained by working at sea. Okay, starting at the bottom, taking tests and the like, working your way up, and nowadays you have to take more and more classes for every stage of advancement. So it's perfectly feasible to start. It's essentially no maritime background whatsoever. Get on a ship, work, keep your nose clean, take tests, accumulate sea time, and you work your way up. Other skills that you have to have that we teach down at the Maritime Center, and sometimes the words on these things, the names of them change as the Coast Guard goes around and changes things, but you got to have basic training. It teaches you basic safety and survival on the ship, and you have to have a lifeboatman's class to teach you how to get off and operate your lifeboat. Survival suits and the like. You got to have training in those things. You mentioned being able to launch a davit. Most of the time in this day and age, you're going to have rafts. Okay, how do you deploy raft? How do you stand the raft up when it's in the water upside down and you want to get inside? You got to have this kind of training, signaling, and then down here in the lower right, we have fast rescue boats, which are required on lots of different types of ships this day and age. So we have we can train in this. Firefighting, incredibly important. Nothing more dangerous at sea than fire. Okay, so you have to be trained in it. It's one of the things that you don't just go out and do it. You got to have a four-wheel training. You have to learn how to handle your gear, how to get into your gear. These folks in the middle there, they're not cowering in the storeroom trying to stay away. They're preparing to enter. You got a person on the nozzle. Okay, you got a person behind them. You got a third person to help move the hose. You've got team. Firefighting is a team effort. So going through drills on this kind of stuff, I love fire. It's great. Not everybody does. Okay, and it's great training. It's a team effort, and it's a great place to start to learn how to pick out people with their skills. There's some people who will never be any good at this kind of stuff. You don't put them on your team. Okay, you get the people that are good, people that want to get in there. Okay, those are the people that you need to pick out and attack. They had a small fire on the Columbia a few weeks ago, and I don't know all of the details other than it wasn't a bad deal. But I definitely heard that the crew acted very, very professionally. You know, they got suited up, they laid everything out, they got it done quick. And how did they know how to do that? Because they were trained. And I'd be willing to bet a fair amount of money that most of those people came through our training program. Okay, so on the deck side, you got to do lots of other navigational skills and things like that. We use the latest in high-tech training aids on the left here. Our esteemed professors, Chris Boss and Mike Labarge. doing telepathic implementation there. Okay. Radars. How do you read radars? All the rest of that kind of stuff. We've got classes specifically for qualification on that. Down in the lower right, we've got our full mission bridge simulator. Lady on the left is Lisa Murkowski, who is one of the people instrumental in getting this type of legislation and is somebody that gets lobbied to give us money. I don't know that she's particularly given us money yet, but we keep working on her, okay? Everybody likes the bridge simulator. Love going in there and playing with it, okay? And I will admit the bridge is that type of stuff. Ships, bridges, and aircraft cockpits lend themselves to simulation really, really well. On the left, we got somebody that is, we've got these little table consoles that they can work on, and they practicing an FRB approach to a ship. It's also the kind of thing that you could practice pilot boats approaches up to a shift. And on the right here, we've got a person doing helmsman training, and under what's called RFPNW and STCW mandated class, and ratings forming part of a navigation watch. So you have to have taken a class on how you properly respond to helm commands and things. Down at my end of the world, the QMED class, we cover a lot in there. Diesel engines, hydraulics, electricity, all the rest of that kind of stuff. People like this stuff. And like I say, you don't like this kind of stuff, don't do it. Find something else to do. And we get lots of people with varying skill sets. I get people all the way from young people that really never used tools in their life to middle-aged folks that are looking for a career change. Okay, everybody goes through exactly the same training program, and they get, in this case, they're taking an engine apart in the background. You've got a fancy refrigeration trainer there. Precision measurements, how do you use micrometers and dial indicators and stuff like that. And then down on the lower right, that big crankshaft that you saw a few minutes ago? Well, this is one half of the largest engine in the world. These things are up around 100, 110,000 horsepower these days. 12-cylinder, 14-cylinder engines. They're really pretty impressive. So again, all kinds of people. I got to tell you, and I'm not making fun of anybody. I've had some of the tiniest women in there that you can imagine, okay? And they do really, really well because they want to be there. That's the most important thing, is they want to learn what's going on. This young lady on the right has got her own gill nutter. She owns her own gill nutter, and she wants to learn how all this stuff works. And it's like teach anybody, work smart, folks. Don't work hard. And if you need help, ask for it. That's all there is to it. Okay, something that's coming up. We haven't stood it up yet. For years, we've had a outboard I class for boat owners. So basic outboard maintenance. We've got the money. I haven't spent it yet, but we're standing up certified Yamaha training, and we're going to go through all the way from the smallest Yamaha engines. We'll probably top out at about these 250s up there. These modern outboard engines are pretty amazing, all things considered. They pack an awful lot into a really tight package, and you don't want to go tearing into them unless you got some idea of what's going on. This was really brought about by the recognition. Alaska probably has got the highest percentage of working outboards in the United States. There's more outboard engines in Tampa Bay than there is in the entire state of Alaska, but they're not working outboards, okay? We've got working outboards. You can go into any village out in the bush, and where the skiffs come up on the right there, and you just go right past where the bushes start, and there's outboard motors stacked up. Most of that is due to lack of maintenance. Okay, so our trust is completely going to be about how do you, the boat owner or the charter boat owner, prolong the life of your outboard motor, and that will be the introduction part of it. And then we will teach the first couple levels of certified Yamaha training. Yamaha is the industry leader in training techs for their dealers. They realized a number of years ago that they weren't getting techs, so they set up training programs, and we're going to teach the first couple levels of that. So hopefully we get the first one of those kicked off in the springtime. My pet project for the moment is we're getting an engine room simulator up. It's in the hopper exactly as we work. Engine room simulators look different than bridge simulators do, but this will open up other training opportunities for us to teach other different types of class also. Our purpose is to train people specifically in the skills that they need to work in the maritime industry. Okay. Graduate from our maritime and multi-skilled work class, you get a occupational endorsement, and you get your cook card certificate. That's a big deal. Just a little bit of a note on who our students are. Alaska has the highest percentage of college starting non-completers in the nation, which is an interesting statistic in and of its own right. So it's a real ripe opportunity to come on back to school, identify something that you want, and this is commonly nursing. Nursing gets a lot of people that fit that profile. So we have not, our students generally fit the non-traditional students. They tend to be a little bit open, older. We have a high percentage of females, not as high as down south. We have a significant percentage of veterans and Alaskan natives. How do we put the word out? Things like this. Truthfully, the fact of the matter is that the best way for us is word of mouth. People hear about these things. People hear about what we do, and they come in. Here's a good example of that. Half of our maritime and multi-skilled workers come from the commercial fishing industry. Okay, because those are folks that have recognized they don't have a good technical background and they want to learn more. So about half of our people nowadays come out of that, and it's really good to see them. So I'm not going to go into this any further. Believe me, I can talk all night if you like. So try to shorten it down here. So we do have, we're looking forward into the future for you. We do have a marine transportation AAS student. Okay. I've said several times what counts out there, the license and the amount of seat time. Why do we have an AAS? Because it helps you farther down the road. That's something that people recognize. And when eventually you come ashore, people say, oh, you took enough of an interest in this to get a degree, and good on you. So we got one that splits both in a deck and engine room emphasis. As I mentioned, things that tech people do, particularly important in this part of the world, towing industry, big for us. Okay, and then our tour operators. Lots of people start out handling the lines on a lighthouse or an Allen Marine boat, and a few years later, they're driving the boat. Okay, so QBED, obviously engine room emphasis. The Marine Highway is a big employer of our people and the various towing outfits. Our people are spreading out. Years ago, I just did a brief inventory of what I knew of, and we had people working for 14 or 15 different outfits, more than you would think. And that's not just here in town, okay, because they spread out. People, these are very portable credentials. Okay, there's other ways of getting your AAS. I'm not going to bother to go into this. If this kind of thing interests you, come in and talk to us. Or if once you get into the program and you say, I'd like to complete out a degree, how do I do that? We'd be happy to talk to you about this kind of stuff. And it does make a difference. Long term, you got to be realistic. How many people actually stay in the maritime business? A lot of it depends on when you got started. Okay, if you got started pretty young, I would say most of the people have moved on in the 5 to 8 year range. People the last 15 years, they're lifers. They're going to stay at that point in time. Okay, once you get to those points, and what's the big thing that people brings people ashore? They started a family. You got to be honest about that. Okay, so they got to look for other things to do. We partner with a number of people. You can read those. One of the important ones is the Sea Pilots, the Southeast Alaska Pilots Association. Okay, and they're big users of our simulator down here. They come in and they get their tune-up runs in there before the season actually starts. You got to do all that stuff. Like I say, bigger the shipyard, an important employer in here in town. You got to get seat time. Our QMEDs to get their actual QMED need an additional 120 days of seat time, and most of them have gotten it through the Alaska Marine Highway, which has an internship program. That being said, other things are opening up. I don't want to go into details. Why? It's because people are hurting for mariners, and they're opening up other pathways. People will finish our QMED class, and they will go into one of these employers. They will get a genuine, good-paying job. They'll collect the seat time, and their next step up is to get the QMED. Okay, there's only, like I said, our people do well. We figure it's a little tough to say about a 95% employment rate for our maritime and multi-skilled work classes. Okay, starting out at, I just want to show you wages for just a minute, and I don't want to get visions of sugar plums dancing in your head. Okay, this is the wage scale for a QMED at the Marine Highway, and that's pretty decent money. Okay. This is verifiable nationwide statistics on what a QMED makes. So nationwide, and this includes the real low wage areas like the Gulf of Mexico, they usually make in excess of $80,000 a year. Not bad, okay? And what I really want to show you how you read some of these things. There. We've had NOAA come in. Okay, they're looking for people, and the same, $40,000 a year is nothing to sniff at, but that's not world-beating wages. Okay. However, what's the real wage that they come home? They come home in excess of that $80,000 a year range. Why? Because the overtime that you work. Okay. And here is a very real-world number. Military Sealift Command. They are making in excess of $100,000 a year plus signing bonuses, and that's good money by anybody's standard. That's pretty good money. Like I said, we've had a NOAA in town. They're looking for people. We've had several of our people go to NOAA already, and they are being employed as usually GVAs. We've had a new recruiter thing. They're going to go straight into kind of an oiler position, so they get their scale position, so they get a full wage position right off the bat. They get their seat time, and they can get their QMED pretty quickly. With the opening of the new dock, we're going to have the Fairweather home ported in town here. We had the NOAA Admiral for this part of the world visit us about 2 months ago. Very impressive man. I was impressed by him. And he, if you saw the article in the paper, he had very kind words to say about the university and about NOAA's intention to train here. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. Again, it's an industry that the world is your oyster. How far do you want to go with this kind of stuff? And that being said, I know myself as a marine engineer, coming up through a time when jobs are hard to find, I never lacked for work. Okay, because marine engineers are very employable. Any questions?
Yeah, I'd say, do you seem to be saying that the AAS degree is mainly to kind of help you down the road?
Yes, I got to be perfectly honest. You don't need that right off the bat. I lightly skipped over in there some other pathways to the AAS. But yes, it is the kind of thing, and I hate to say it, but I know that I've done it. Every employer does it. You get a dozen resumes come your way, and you look at them, and you don't. These people come at them, and you say the credentials that they hold. How do you sort them? Well, one of the ways is who's got the higher degree, who's got the higher license, who went out of their way to do that little bit of extra to finish that kind of. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Professor Long. Just a couple little items of business. The UAS Ketchikan Campus Library.
Fantastic book.
And the public is welcome in the library, and you can get a library card here, and you can check this out.
The Arctic Rail by Peter Burton.
Next, Ask UAS is October 25th at 6 p.m. That's a Wednesday. And Professor James Ryan is going to be talking about Chat GPT. So if you are curious about it,
What?
Chat GPT, and the role of AI. It's going to be interesting.
It is.
So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. If you got any questions at all, don't hesitate at all. You can get a hold of us. The counselors here, Jesse, the counselor's office,